Afternoon, everyone. I will talk about some recent achievements that we've done. Basically, we're still testing the feasibility of performing the attenuation in the uppermost, attenuation tomography, sorry, of the uppermost inner core. So I will show you some of the stuff that we managed to get. So for the past almost 2 decades now, we believe that the uppermost inner core exhibits a strong harmonic degree 1 heterogeneity in both velocity and attenuation. And this was first shown by Tanaka and Hamaguchi back in 1997 when they showed this for velocity. And it has been since then confirmed in subsequent research for velocity and later expanded to attenuation in some of the research which is listed here. And it is generally agreed upon that the Eastern Hemisphere exhibits high velocity and high attenuation, and the Western Hemisphere exhibits low velocity and low attenuation. And Tanaka and Hamaguchi have defined the boundaries as they are shown here on this plot. But recently, some seismological evidence points out a possible degree 2 heterogeneity in the uppermost inner core for velocity and attenuation. And so this was first shown by Tanaka and others last year for the uppermost 80 kilometers of the inner core, where they observed that the high attenuation zone extends from the Eastern Hemisphere all the way to the Western Pacific and North America. So instead of observing 2 separate hemispheres, they show 3 separate bins, one with low velocity and high attenuation, the other with low velocity and low attenuation, and the third one with high attenuation and high velocity. And this was confirmed later, basically this year, by Eritani and others, who also have divided the Western Hemisphere in 2 separate parts, the more attenuated part beneath Western Pacific and Americas, and the less attenuated one beneath Atlantic and Africa. So they just extended this one to the uppermost 300 kilometers of the inner core. In the past 2 decades, we also had geodynamical models trying to explain the previously observed degree 1 heterogeneity. And we can group them in 2 main streams of thought. The first group of models favors the thermal coupling between core mantle boundary and the inner core boundary. And basically what that means is it just maps the structure, the thermal anomalies of the lowermost mantle onto the inner core boundary. And tomographic images show us that the thermal anomalies of the lowermost mantle are of a degree 2, of harmonic degree 2. So if you would expect those to be mapped onto the inner core boundary, that's the kind of structure that you would also observe in the uppermost inner core for both velocity and attenuation. This would affect it. And the second group of models favors the translational convection within the inner core itself. And that type of model specifically requires and results in a harmonic degree 1 heterogeneity only. So the ones that favor the thermal coupling allow more complex structures to form in the uppermost inner core. And that means if some of the recent findings are correct, they would strengthen the credibilities of the geodynamical models that favor thermal coupling between core mantle boundary and inner core boundary. And this is in a way what we're trying to address in our study. We're aiming to perform attenuation tomography. First of all, for now, we're still testing it, trying to see whether this is feasible. And hopefully, when we do perform it, we could point to one of these models, to one of the group of models, or point to an altogether new one, possibly, depending on what we see. So to do the attenuation tomography, we still are collecting data, and in doing so, we're using the SAWIB algorithm kindly provided by Garcia. And this algorithm is based on simulated annealing approach. It is essentially an iterative waveform modeling tool that synthesizes a synthetic waveform that fits best to an observed one. So how does it do that? What we're measuring here is the Tstar parameter, defined here as the total travel time of the PK-PDF ray within the inner core over the average quality factor of the area along the ray path. And what this algorithm does is it takes a reference phase, which in my case is the PKPBC, shown here, and models the other core phases in relation to it. So the simplified way to show that is this equation down there, where if you take the BC displacement here, and for example, if you then convolve it with an attenuation operator, which is controlled by a Tstar parameter, you will get an attenuated version of the BC waveform, and that is essentially the DF here. If you apply the Hilbert transform to it, you will get a reverse polarity waveform, and that is your AB. And so over the course of many iterations, this algorithm randomly perturbs various parameters, such as the arrival times of these phases, differential travel times between them, amplitudes, and shape and width of the pulse, which are all controlled by the Tstar parameter, until it finds the best fit to an observed seismogram. It does so for all the records of a particular event simultaneously, and this is why we're using it, because it's very quick. I can get my Tstar measurements for all the records at once. And here I can show you an example of fit as a result of this algorithm for a particular Brazil event, where black waveforms are the observed ones and the grey ones are the best fit synthetics as output of this algorithm. And on the top here is my current data set, showing also the coverage, where red stars are the earthquakes used so far, and orange triangles are stations that recorded them. The purple circles here are bottoming points of the PKPDF rays, shown here in brown. And these are also the points where we assume the Tstar measurement was made. So they're all plotted here on this image, and you can see they're plotted as a function of the bottoming longitude and bottoming depth below the inner core boundary. And you can see here that we have a slight trend of increase of Tstar as we go deeper into the inner core, which is something we would expect. We would expect higher attenuation as we go deeper. We have now used these data and basically undertook a proof of concept test, really, to using some synthetic studies to see whether this method and measurements that we obtain using it can recover the attenuation anomalies that we expect to see. And so here I'm showing you some of these synthetic tests, where in the upper left corner is the coverage as you've just seen it. And just below it is the, an example of input model for a synthetic test, which in this case is a hemispherical model with boundaries defined by Tanaka and Hamaguchi, where the eastern hemisphere is more attenuated than the western. And these here are various realizations of a linear inversion for this synthetic test, where these plots in sort of greenish-bluish color palette are showing basically the block parameterization of our uppermost inner core. So this is what we're doing for now. We're hoping to avoid parameterization in the future altogether and use Bayesian transdimensional inversion, so we don't have any imposed parameterization whatsoever. But for now, we parameterize it as blocks, meaning they're squares, and in this particular case here, they're 10 degrees in size. So this shows how many times each of the blocks has been hit. So it's basically a reflection of this coverage here. And the blocks that have not been hit at all are shown in black, and they have not been inverted for, so as not to introduce bias into results. And this here is the recovery of this input model using 10-degree block parameterization with this coverage for now. And as you can see, it's not perfect. If it gets a little bit better if we increase the block size to 15 degrees and then we have fewer unsampled blocks. However, it is really good once we increase the block size to 30 degrees and we have no unsampled blocks at all. And we have tried this with several configurations for the input model, basically accounting for pretty much any type of attenuation anomaly that we can get, to see whether we can recover any type of anomaly. And here you can see that as soon as, for now, what with this coverage and the amount of data, if we increase the block size to 30 or 45 degrees, the recovery of the input model is very good. So this shows us that it is feasible to perform attenuation tomography. We should be able to see any type of heterogeneity that it shows there. However, due to scarcity of the data, we haven't performed inversion with real data, as we aim to increase the number of data and improve the resolution. However, what I can show you here is some raw measurements of Tstar for particular events, and so these are some examples where you can see that the Tstar measurements, basically the rays sampling what we think of as the Western Hemisphere, definitely show lower Tstar, lower attenuation than those measured in the Eastern Hemisphere. And these here are just the records of the events shown here. And there is another example here as well. Again, we have smaller Tstar here. There is one large dot over here, and larger Tstar in what we think of as the Eastern Hemisphere. So when we take just the part of data that samples the uppermost 220 kilometers, so this is not an entire data set, this is just a little portion of it, we can also see, if we plot it as a function of bottoming point longitude, or just equivalently here, plot it on a map and show it in logarithmic scale just so it's clearer to see. You can definitely see that, again, the Tstar measured in what we think of as the Eastern Hemisphere is larger than the Tstar measured in the Western Hemisphere. And to be absolutely sure of that, we performed a spherical harmonic degree expansion to a harmonic degree 1 to see whether these data really show any like harmonic degree 1 heterogeneity. And you can see here that it do show that with the boundaries basically going here where the Eastern Hemisphere is, but definitely the high attenuation zone does in this data extend from the Eastern Hemisphere all the way to Western Pacific and America. So in a way proves what Tanaka and others and Iritani and others have shown so far. Thank you.
We have time for some questions.
We haven't addressed anisotropy for now. Plus, we will have to collect more data, especially polar ones, to address that type of thing. So we're in the stage of collecting more and more data to be able to answer that question. So for now, I can't tell.
Other questions? I have just a simple question about your data set. You were showing the increase in attenuation with depth below the ICB, but at very shallow depths you had very high attenuation. Is that just from the sampling? Or?
It's scattering at that depth, so that's very close to the core boundary, and you have focusing and defocusing at that point. So you will have a lot of scattering data with that close to the boundary. So that happens, yes, but the rest of it is something I would definitely trust. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, let's thank Tanya again.
Thank you.